Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora ana koutou katoa toa. Whakalofa lahi atu ki mu tolo osi. Talofa ni, malo ni koutou. Nisa bulavanaka. Whakatalofa atu. No ea Māori, kamna Māori. Malo e le mali ea. Malo lava le langi e mama male soe fua mawa. O e tulo atu, tulo na lava. Tēnei te mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa, nā ui o te moana nui a kiwa. Kua rau ika nei e raro i te kaupapa whakahirehere o te wā. Tapu moi tae hamai. Tapu moi nahi tuunga, o ku whaa whakatapua. Kai kole ki mautali ae, kole whakamole mole te uwhai. O te tu lai atu, o au o ai avia le tātou nā whā, mali atua e manaloi si leo. Welcome to you all who have come here today for this important occasion. I stand before you as a symbol of the crown that wronged you nearly 50 years ago. Today is a day of solemn reflection, and over the past weeks, I have particularly reflected on the story of Pacific peoples in New Zealand. This is a lengthy story that continues to evolve. One part of this bigger story is the migration from the Pacific to Aotearoa in the 1950s, and how this has shaped who we are today as a nation, made up of many rich and diverse cultures. We have experienced the Pacific Aotearoa journey shift from one of new settlement to the present day, Pacific diaspora in New Zealand, where Pacific peoples are an integral part of Aotearoa's cultural and social fabric, and are active contributors to our economic success. However, in the multiple chapters of Pacific people's story in New Zealand, the chapter of the Dawn Raid stands out as one that continues to cast a long shadow. Discriminatory application of immigration laws in the 1970s. During the economic boom of the 1950s, New Zealand encouraged significant migration from the Pacific region to fill labour shortages in the manufacturing and primary production sector. It was a time of economic prosperity, and many migrated from the Pacific to New Zealand as a result. However, at the downturn of the economy in the early 1970s, parts of our society began to see migrants as jeopardising their financial security and quality of life. The migrants who became the focal point and scapegoat for these fears were largely Pacific peoples. And when police and immigration enforced immigration laws around overstaying, not everyone was targeted. Instead, police and immigration officials overwhelmingly conducted raids on the homes of Pacific families. Officials, often accompanied by dogs, undertook late night and early morning raids of homes. Residents in those homes were woken abruptly, physically removed from their beds and forced into police vans to be taken for questioning. Some were hauled to the police station to appear in court the next day, barefoot, in pyjamas or in clothes loaned to them in the holding cells. Others were wrongfully detained. During what became known as the Dawn Raids period, police also conducted random stops and checks which required any person on request to produce their passport or permit if there was good cause to suspect an immigration-related offence, like overstaying a permit. This lawful provision was exploited to racially profile those who were suspected as being overstayers, with Pacific peoples, Māori, and other people of colour randomly stopped in the street, at churches and schools and other public places. I understand that at that time, public statements were made that a passport should be carried by those who looked like and spoke like they were not born in New Zealand. Many groups, such as the Citizens Association for Racial Equality, Ngā Tamata Toa, Amnesty Aroha, and the Federation of Labour took to the streets in protest of these actions. A prominent youth group was the Polynesian Panthers. A social justice movement that was founded in inner city Auckland in June 1971. This movement operated to bring awareness to the treatment of Pacific peoples and to protest Crown actions and immigration policies. These protests, coupled with increasingly negative public reaction, led to the end of the Dawn Raids in 1976. When we look back, it is now very clear that the immigration laws of the time were enforced in a discriminatory manner, and that Pacific peoples were specifically targeted and racially profiled when these activities were carried out. The statistics are undeniable. There were no reported raids on any homes of people who were not Pacific. No raids or random stops were exacted towards European people. Following an inquiry report of the then Race Relations Conciliator Walter Hirsch in 1986, it was found that while Pacific peoples comprised roughly a third of overstayers, they represented 86% of all prosecutions. During the same period, overstayers from the United States and Great Britain, who together comprised also roughly a third of overstayers, made up only 5% of prosecutions. While these events took place almost 50 years ago, the legacy of the Dawn Raids era lives on today in Pacific communities. It remains vividly etched in the memory of those who were directly impacted. It lives on in the disruption of trust and faith in authorities. And it lives on in the unresolved grievances of Pacific communities that these events happened and that to this day they have gone unaddressed. Today, I stand on behalf of the New Zealand Government to offer a formal and unreserved apology to Pacific communities for the discriminatory implementation of the immigration laws of the 1970s that led to the events of the Dawn Raids. The government expresses its sorrow, remorse and regret that the Dawn Raids and random police checks occurred and that these actions were ever considered appropriate. Our government conveys to the future generations of Aotearoa that the past actions of the Crown were wrong and that the treatment of your ancestors was wrong. We convey to you our deepest and sincerest apology. We also apologise for the impact these events have had on other peoples, such as Māori and other ethnic communities who are unfairly targeted and impacted by the random police checks of the time. We acknowledge the distress and hurt that these experiences would have caused. As a nation, we expect everyone in New Zealand to be treated with dignity and respect, and we expect that all individuals are guaranteed their rights without distinction of any kind. Unfortunately, these expectations were not met in this case, and inequities that stem from direct and indirect discrimination continue to exist. We're committed to eliminating racism in all its forms in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and affording everyone the right to be treated humanely and with respect and with dignity. I want to emphasise that under our current immigration compliance regime, the government no longer prioritises compliance activity and deportation on the basis of ethnicity or nationality, but instead seeks to address potential risks to the New Zealand community and the integrity of the immigration system. As a government, we want to honour Pacific ways of seeking reconciliation. We understand that Pacific practices and protocols vary, but the common thread that underpins these practices is the expectation of reconciliation that is meaningful, genuine, and that restores the balance from past wrongs. We want our apology to be in a manner that has meaning to Pacific peoples. I also hope that our presence and apology here today helps weave together our connections as people. But I understand that in many cultures, including in Pacific cultures, words alone are not sufficient to convey an apology, and it is appropriate to include tangible gestures of goodwill and reconciliation. We acknowledge the enduring hurt that has been caused to those who were directly affected by the Dawn raids, as well as the lasting impact these events have had on subsequent generations. I've heard that for many people, the hurt was so deep that nearly 50 years later, it's a struggle to talk about. We recognise no gestures can mend this hurt. However, we hope that the gestures I'm about to outline are accepted as a way of expressing our deepest of sorrow, whilst recognising the wrongs of the past, and to pave a new dawn and a new beginning for Pacific peoples in New Zealand. As a government, we commit to the following gestures of goodwill and reconciliation to our Pacific communities. We will support the development of a historical account of the Dawn raids, which can be used for education purposes. As part of this, the community will have the opportunity to come forward and share their experiences. May the process of gathering an official historic account from written records and oral history provide an opportunity for Pacific peoples to begin a new journey of healing, and we hope one that will restore mana. We will ensure resources are available to schools and kura who choose to teach the history of the Dawn raids, which would include histories of those directly affected. May this opportunity help future generations gain knowledge and understanding that will help them ensure the mistakes of the past are not ever repeated again. We will provide $2.1 million in education scholarships and fellowships to Pacific communities in New Zealand. May this gesture provide opportunities for the pursuit of tertiary education on subjects that will build confidence and pride in Pacific peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we will provide $1 million in Manaaki, New Zealand short-term training scholarships for young leaders from Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu and Fiji. May these opportunities grow Pacific leadership that is confident and proud. Almost 50 years on from the Dawn raids, the Pacific story continues to shift. This chapter sees a Pacific Aotearoa that is self-assured, thriving, prosperous and resilient. We hope that today has brought some much-needed closure and healing for our Pacific communities, and that it will enable us to keep growing together as a community and as a nation. Once again, my deepest acknowledgements and respect to all those who are directly affected by the harms caused during the Dawn raids, including those who continue to suffer the scars. My acknowledgement and gratitude to the many individuals and organisations who stood up for justice, called out the Dawn raids for what they were, supported Pacific peoples throughout, and championed the need for an apology. It is my sincere hope this apology will go some way in helping the Pacific youth of today know with certainty that they have every right to hold their head up high and feel confident and proud of their Pacific heritage, and in particular the sacrifices their parents and grandparents have made for Aotearoa, New Zealand. May my words today be received in the spirit of humility that I convey them. O whaatu, alofa atu, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, kia kaha, pāpatai malo o pito, me tāki mata, pa koe lahi.